I see you shiver with anticipation.
It's time for Maths with Mr. Thomas.
Here we are with Chapter 1. This is now the review lesson for significant figures. This is just a quick recap of all the key points in this chapter. It doesn't include every example, it doesn't include every slide, and it doesn't include much of an explanation. If there's anything you are unsure of, look back to the individual lessons where I will explain everything in a little more detail. So what was this chapter all about? Significant figures. Well, we started off looking at what significant figures are and then working out how many significant figures are in a number. So, it started off explaining that significant just means important, and the closer a number, the closer a digit is to the beginning of a number, the more significant it is. For example, if I won £3,147,592 in the National Lottery, well, what you're taking from that is that I won £3 million. It's the 3 that is the most important. The closer a number is to the start of a number, the more significant it is, as it says up here. If you have decimals as well, if we've got 0.021, well, you ignore the zeros and the 2 would be the most important number. It's the most significant because it shows you how many hundredths there are. So we can work out how many significant figures are in a number by looking at where to start and where to finish. So we always start at the first digit that is not 0. So starting from the left, if you work your way along a number, the first digit that you come to that's not a 0, boom, 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 is the first significant figure. Beside that one, you've got the second, even if it's a 0. Beside that, you've got a third, even if it's a 0. And then you've got the fourth, fifth, and sixth, and so on. But you need to think about where to stop. Stop! If the number ends before the decimal point, you count up to the last digit that is not a 0. So for example here, that there, the 3 is the first non-zero number, so that's the first significant, but it ends before the decimal, there's no decimal, so you count up to the last number that is not a 0, so the 7. So that would have 1, 2, 3 significant figures. With 45,007, first significant figure here is the 4. Again, it ends before the decimal, there's no decimal there, so you count up to the last digit that's not a 0. So that's the first, that's the second, that's the third, even though it's a 0, that's the fourth, that's the fifth, so that would be 5 significant figures there. However, if the number ends after the decimal point, what you do is you count up to the very last digit, even if it is a 0. So, with 27.0901, well, the first significant figure there is the 2, first number that you come to that's not a 0, and because it ends after the decimal, you count up to that very last number, so you count up to the 1. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 significant figures. With 0.040, there are 2 significant figures there because the first one is the first number that is not a 0, which is the 4. And because it ends after the decimal, you go up to that very last digit, so you go up to the 0. So start at the 4, go to the 0, there's only 2 significant figures there. This is the exercise that I gave you. You may wish to try some of these just now, just to check that you are managing them, just to check that you do agree with these answers. If you don't, maybe have a look back at that video, which explains why these are the answers to each of these questions. Look back at that very first lesson. But once you've mastered that, we then went on to look at rounding to significant figures. So the way you can round is we first of all look for the first significant figure and then look for the significant figure required. So if we're rounding to 2 significant figures, we find the first and then we'll find the second. If we're rounding to 3 significant figures, well, we find the first, and that way you can easily work out what the third is. Then we take that significant figure and we work out its place value. So is it in the thousands column? Is it in the tens column? Is it in the first decimal place or the tenths? Whereabouts is it? Is it in the units? Then what we do is we look for that place value and we round to whatever that is. So if it's in the hundreds column, we round to the nearest hundred. If it's in the first decimal place, we round to the first decimal place. Again, here were examples. So, for example, this 62. So to round that to one significant figure, find the first significant figure. First number that we come to is not a 0, is the 6. That's in the tens column, so we round this number to the nearest 10. This is a rounding poem that I use when I teach rounding. It may help one or two of you, it may not. Use it if you want. But if you round that number to the nearest 10, find your number, look next door, it's 4 or less, you just ignore. So instead of 62, you ignore the 2 and it just stays as 60. With other ones, for example, 0.0671, well, the first number that you come to is not a 0, is the 6. That's the first significant figure. That's what we want to round to, so we just stay there. We then look at what column that is in. Well, here that is the second decimal place. The 6 is the second decimal place, so we want to round this number to 2 decimal places. So to round that to 2 decimal places, look at the number after. Because it's a 7, you know you're going to round up. Or you could think, find your number like next door. If it's 5 or more, you add one more. So instead of being 0.06, well, you add one more. So it'll be 0.07. Dun, dun, dun. You can also round to other significant figures. So if you round to 2 significant figures, well, it's the same idea. So 708, if you round that to 2 significant figures, well, you find that first significant figure, first non-zero number, then find the second significant figure, because that's what you want to round to. That number there is in the tens column, so you round this number to the nearest 10. Find your number, look next door, it's 5 or more, so you add one more. So that'll go to 710. Just look out for the likes of H. With H, you've got 69.73. If you round that to 2 significant figures, well, the first significant figure is the 6. The second significant figure is the 9. So that there is the unit. So you want to round that to nearest unit or whole number. So find your number, look next door, it's 5 or more, so you add one more. If it's a 9, it's going to go up to a 0. But if that happens, the number in front of that will also go up. So 69 will go up to 70. However, if you look at this, well, 70 only really has one significant figure. There's the first significant figure, and then the number ends before the decimal. So you count up to the last number that's not a 0, which is also that 7. So it's only got that first significant figure. But we're asked to round to 2 significant figures. Sometimes that is the case when we are rounding to significant figures, and if that is the case, that's absolutely fine. That is still the right answer. There are more examples where I'm rounding to 3 significant figures, so again, look back to that lesson if you want it. But the final lesson in this chapter was estimating using rounding. So sometimes you don't want an exact answer, you're just looking for a rough answer, an estimate, an approximation with different calculations. For example, if I asked you to work out 6,328, add 1,847, it would take a bit of time to work that out. But if you just wanted a rough answer, you could round each number to 1 significant figure first. So first significant figure is the 6, because it's the first non-zero number. If you round 6,328 to 1 significant figure, well, that would go to 6,000. 1,847, if you round that to 1 significant figure, well, the first significant figure is the 1. That is in the thousands column, so if you round that number to nearest 1,000, well, that goes to 2,000. It gives you an easier calculation. So that's going to be approximately 6,000 at 2,000, which means you'll have an approximate answer of 8,000. There were more examples like that, but this one here was asking to round 2 significant figures. So to round to 2 significant figures, once again, the same way as we did in lesson 2, there's the first significant figure, there's the second, it's in the thousands column, so round this number to nearest 1,000, 73,000. This number here is the first significant figure, that's the second, that's in the hundreds column, so round that number to the nearest hundreds. So it'll be 8,700. Take them away, and you will get that approximation for your answer. With this one, we're just doing the exact same thing, rounding to 1 significant figure, but because we had more than one calculation to do, you had to think about BIDMAS or BODMAS. So just remember the multiply would always come before the add or subtract. So we would have 1,000 plus the answer to this. And to work out the answer to 80 times 900, do 8 times 9 and add on your 3 zeros. And again, you'll get an approximate answer to the initial calculation. We had a worded question here. There were 4,182 weekly editions of the Beano. By rounding to 1 significant figure, calculate roughly how long the comic has been running for. We know there's 52 weeks in a year, so if we divide that by 52, we can work out how many years the comic has been running. So to work out 4,182 divided by 52, well, that's quite difficult to work out. But what you could always do is you could get a rough estimate for each of these numbers, so round them both to 1 significant figure. So rounding 4,182 to 1 significant figure is 4,000, because the first significant figure is in the thousands column, and that to the nearest 1,000 is 4,000. Here the first significant figure is in the tens column, and 52 to nearest 10 is 50. To divide them, cancel out a 0 from each of these numbers, so it's 400 divided by 5. And then 400 divided by 5 will give you 80, meaning then the Beano has been running for approximately 80 years. Once again, this has been a very quick recap. If there's anything you're wanting in a little more detail, look back at these individual lessons. But best of luck with significant figures. You may wish to try some of these questions from the TJ book, the 4+, and the review lesson. Page 10, just questions 1 to 5. Good luck with rounding to significant figures. Woo! Patient.